we're reading about osteoarthritis and dental decay and so forth. But that's you too, class. What the things you eat, your physical activity, and so you're part of this bioarchaeology.
I have the pleasure of speaking with distinguished University Professor Clark Spencer Larsen at The Ohio State University. So welcome, Professor Larsen. Could you please give a brief overview of your career and research?
Yes, thank you. It's really great to be here. So my career goes back to when I was a freshman in college, really. I took an osteology course. I wanted to be an archaeologist. I took an osteology course with William M. Bass, who's a very famous osteologist, bioarchaeologist, and I took his course when I was a freshman in college. They were just kind of taking seniors for this course, but I really wanted to take the course. So took a very difficult course and I learned bones and teeth. And so he was impressed enough to get me onto a Smithsonian project that summer, excavating human remains. And then for years after, that's what I've been doing, and not necessarily excavating, but studying human remains. So from college, I went on to the University of Michigan, where I got my PhD with that group. It's a very excellent program, and learned pretty much all I need to know about human remains, anatomy, kind of other areas of biological anthropology. So over the course of finishing my PhD, afterwards I went through a series of jobs. Not that I couldn't hold a job, but I was moving from sort of really low-level lecturing positions to ending up at Northern Illinois University, and then Purdue, and then University of North Carolina, before coming here to Ohio State a couple of decades ago. So much of my career has been here at Ohio State University, where I've been working on a number of projects, and a big one being on the Georgia coast. That's been a while since we're working there, but large projects in Turkey, south central Turkey, looking at early farming populations, earliest city, I would say, dating some 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. So that was a huge boost in my interest in the Neolithic and the impact of farming on human health. So since then, beginning with that project, and only before, I've been investigating the impact of farming on human health and other aspects of the human condition. And so what we've learned and what we talk about and write about is that once people become farmers, they're, of course, shifting from a more general diet to one that's dominated by plant carbohydrates. Today, things like corn, rice, so forth. And that set the tone for this transition to farming, occurring between the sort of late Pleistocene, very cold conditions, to the climates that we're experiencing today, which started about 10,000 years ago. And so this sets up the perfect conditions for people figuring out how to turn wild, non-domesticated plants, and how that process of domestication occurred, and the impact that had in terms of diet. So with agriculture, people began to settle down. They live in permanent communities, and that creates the circumstances for all kinds of things that take place. So that's the long and short of how I got into this field. Mainly all about human remains and what they tell us about life and lifestyle.
Thank you. And what would you consider your most significant research achievement or the accomplishment that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I would say that the most significant achievement is the study of the impact of farming on human health. And most recently, we published a significant amount of our research in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, in articles and talking about what takes place with increasing mobility as resources were depleted. In particular, I worked at a place called Çatalhöyük, South Central Turkey. And there we learned that as resources became depleted around this very large community, that people were going further and further from the site to become more mobile in order to acquire resources. But overall, the impact of that farming transition there and elsewhere globally is poor oral health, carbohydrates. We all eat carbohydrates, and we're all pretty frequent visitors to the dentist, largely because of carbohydrates. The normal bacteria that's in your mouth, that's what they consume and metabolize. And as a result of that, it produces an acid which results in tooth decay. That's what tooth decay is. It's a byproduct of those microorganisms and what they're doing in your mouth. And so that's one element of the agricultural transition that we've been looking at. Also in these farming communities, including Çatalhöyük, it's a whole lot of people living in one place, one time, and oftentimes closely packed together. So you can imagine the issues with regard to health circumstances. They're basically living right on their trash, although they're cleaning the Çatalhöyük, they're very tidy in terms of cleaning the floors of their homes. But in large part, the agricultural transition leads to the sedentism and living in one place at one time and in more crowded communities. So all the major infectious diseases that we deal with today really get their start in the Neolithic, in the evolution of the microorganisms that cause major diseases that we see today globally and continuing. And so that is I think the most important achievement of what we've been doing in terms of the research is looking at that really big picture of what's happened beginning 10,000 years ago, laying the whole foundation for many of the issues we have in health and disease and lifestyle today. We're a lot more sedentary than pre-farming populations. That's a health concern in terms of just being sedentary. And so pretty much the conditions that we see today, other conditions that we see today, competition for land and resources, in the origins of warfare beginning in the Neolithic, large-scale battle does not take place before the Neolithic. And as humans begin to settle down, we've been working with a group in Europe looking at that settlement development. Prior to the Neolithic, prior to 10,000 years ago, very little of it. There's conflict, there's interpersonal violence, but not the level of organized warfare of one community saying, we want what they have, we need it, we're going after it. And so we have an article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of these several, where we look at that evidence of warfare. So these are all, I think that the big part of my research has been putting that all together into this picture of what's developed in the world in the past, beginning 10,000 years ago, laying all the conditions for who we are today. And those conditions are going to continue. Most of the global population is dependent upon plant carbohydrates, rice in Asia, wheat, corn. Those are the three big domesticated plants that basically fuel the world today. And so that's an important element of this whole picture of farming, agriculture, and discoveries that we've made. We didn't make the discovery that carbohydrates are and increase in population size. We didn't discover that, but what we have put together is a picture of how it began and the circumstance that led to conditions today.
Thank you. And is there a historical figure in your field who you particularly admire, and what about their work has influenced you in your career?
A key figure that has been very influential for me in terms of how I have how I've sort of shaped bioarchaeology myself, how I look at it, what it does, what's important about it, is a big influence for me is Jane Dykstra. She's a bioarchaeologist at Arizona State University, who coined the term bioarchaeology back in the 70s. And it was a pretty small field then, and mostly descriptive old style osteology, biological anthropology. And she was looking at the record of diet in the American Midwest and how that affected populations and particularly social organization. And so that was a huge influence for me when I then started graduate school with the program at the University of Michigan, and then I started my career and had some really great opportunities in terms of working, doing field work in bioarchaeology and the study of this key transition. And so she's very, very influential in terms of my own career.
Thank you. So how have interpretations of health, diet, and activity changed over the past few decades, and particularly in relation to the agricultural revolution and its impact on human populations?
Yeah. Well, so the field changed in the sense that prior to this work we've been doing, I said prior to the last three decades, it was very descriptive. People were looking at trying to identify races, categories of humans, skull shapes, and so forth, without any kind of biology behind it. But now that owing to this development in this field, bioarchaeology, what we do and what we're interested in, the key issues, for me, as I've said, it's how we got to where we are today. And I think it's a pretty clear story, pretty clear picture of that. But I would say now that the field is more processual. It's looking at, it's applying modern biology right down to the cell, looking at the record of migration through genomic research, looking at the record of diet and so forth through stable isotopes. So it's become a very sophisticated, technologically very sophisticated field. And that technology is not done for the fun of it. It's to address key questions and hypotheses about the past. And so I would say that just in the last even 20 years, I have a book called Bioarchaeology, which has gone through a couple of editions, and now I'm working on the third edition. And particularly this edition, the last one, really pulled together this whole picture of what it is we do in terms of the complexity of the research and the questions we're asking and the hypotheses that we're addressing. So I would say that is the big change in the field, is going from really descriptive to addressing important questions about who we are today. And it gives a context, for example, the spread of infectious diseases that are taking place. And everybody, of course, remembers and still knows about the impact of COVID. And that's all about how the pathogens that caused COVID successfully adapted to humans. And so that is an element of our research as well, is how humans interact with pathogens and why some populations are successful and others not, what the impacts are of a range of pathogens, tuberculosis, another one that we've been studying in terms of its record, which also has quite an ancient prehistory and history. So the questions that we address have real relevance for the world we live in today. And it gives a context, really the important context of why things are happening the way they're happening today, particularly in terms of human biology, human health, and so forth. So I think that is a really important part of our field, its contributions to understanding the world we live in today.
Thank you. So you've already mentioned the site in Turkey, Çatalhöyük, and it's one of the most intensely studied Neolithic sites in the world.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you initially became involved in this project and what have been some of the most surprising or transformative findings to emerge from the research there.
Yeah. So I got involved in the project. Really I was kind of a surprise in a way to me. I was attending a conference in the UK. Some bioarchaeology, some archaeology, and I'd been invited to give a talk. So yeah, I'll come. And so I'm walking across the campus of the institution outside of London, and a gentleman walks up to me and he introduced himself as Ian Hutter, who I know who he was, who he is, real well-known archaeologist. And he said, hey, I've been wanting to meet you, and would you be interested in working at Çatalhöyük? And I really didn't know much about the site except that it was massive, and there had been a project that was ongoing for a while. And he explained to me that it's a very large community where houses closely packed together and multi-story, and if a house is decaying, they would tear it down and build on top of it. And so these houses, the walls are butting against each other. So it's a city where there's no space between buildings. There's some pathways across the site, but these are mortar walls and clay floors, all the same pattern of occupation. And then when someone dies and the family, presumably a family, although we've been looking at the genetic record of individuals who were buried there, and all of the deceased are buried in the floors of their houses. So it's not like a cemetery. It's a series of burials in each of these houses. And so we have excavated hundreds of them and done various studies. And one of them is my favorite, is my first article on the bioarchaeology, the Neolithic, and appeared in PNAS a few years ago, where we pulled together the major findings of the study of the human remains. And we're still working on them, but these are sort of the core findings: that when someone dies, or as I mentioned, they're buried in the floor of the house. And we just assume that these are the individuals, where there's a number of individuals buried in a house, that they're related. We found through looking at the genetic record that's in the morphology, the appearance of the teeth, the chewing surface of the teeth, and so forth, that the associations are there for some people, but in others not. So probably that is a household with relatives living together, and some not. Some individuals who are not relatives. But when someone dies, they're everybody's buried in the floors of these houses. So through our excavations, work we've done there, now hundreds of human remains have been excavated and studied, and it's just this remarkable place because of the quality of the archaeology, the dating, the enormous record of provided by different individuals with different expertise on plants, on proteins, on the artifacts, on the human remains, on disease, and lots of other things that we now have really well documented. So it is among the, I would say, in fact, one of the most well documented Neolithic sites, certainly in Asia.
Thank you. You've collaborated extensively with researchers in forensic anthropology, paleopathologists, and people that use ancient genomics. So how have these kind of interdisciplinary approaches enhanced the study of bioarchaeology?
Yeah, well, I would say that I think really important about it is we now have a picture of these as once living people. Their social circumstances, their health circumstances. I mean, we all take sort of inventory of ourselves and people we live with and people around us, and and make judgments. We're always sort of drawing conclusions about others, and I think that been very important about bioarchaeology, particularly the way that I've been working with it is looking at these multiple circumstances, multiple records of health and activity. We've done one area of study I haven't talked about is applying engineering principles to the study of bone shape, cross sections of the long bones, like the femur, the thigh bone, the upper arm bone, the humerus cross sections, and applying engineering beam theory to the way those bones are shaped and what they tell us about activity. Beam theory, developed by civil mechanical engineers, they apply that to in terms of construction. So when they build a bridge, they want to know that beam that's holding up the bridge is not going to bend and break. So you look at the cross section of a beam in a bridge, it's got an I shape. So you can imagine that, right? You've probably seen this and know what I'm talking about. And that's because what's important about that, what engineers discovered, is that the more you distribute the material away from a central neutral axis, the stronger it is. So it's very tough bending an I-beam. Fortunately, all the buildings in our city and your city and so forth, that infrastructure, those are I-beams. And so they weren't invented just for the fun of it. They were invented in order to, an engineer figured out that you distribute that material away from a central axis, it's going to be stronger, it's going to be harder to bend. And so we've applied those principles with Chris Rupp, who is a biological anthropologist, formerly at Johns Hopkins University. We've been collaborating a long time, looking at the biomechanics of the bones of these individuals that lived at Çatalhöyük, particularly the cross section of the mid part of the femur, the thigh bone, and the mid part of the humerus, the upper arm bone. And so, taking X-rays to get that cross section, and then applying complex beam theory and equations that produce a record that produce values for strength. We've discovered that the Çatalhöyük people have these long bones, femurs and humerus, where the bone's pretty far distributed in adults from a central neutral axis compared to some other populations. So they've adapted to a very demanding lifestyle, physically demanding in terms of what they do in their labor, in terms of crops, what they do in terms of walking and running and so forth. So we even mostly rough, looked at the long bones of young juveniles and showed how over time their biomechanical, their engineering properties are increasing in those kids and also in the adults. So what we're seeing here is that over time, there's more and more mobility further and further away from this community. And so we believe that that's taking place because they have the resources, the quality of the land for growing is lessened closer to the site as they deplete those resources. So do you see what I mean in terms of that kind of mobility? So over time, they're becoming more mobile. So that, I think, is a really important discovery, showing how they adapt to what are reducing resources. They adapt by going further and further from the community to cultivate, to raise crops on arable land, and to acquire wild resources as well. So I think that's another important discovery that we've made with this very large community at Çatalhöyük.
Down is the quick fire round. So all these questions are asked to guests that are in similar areas of research. So what aspect of skeletal biology, what aspect of skeletal biology do you think is the most overlooked in bioarchaeological research?
Yeah, I would say the most overlooked in biological research is probably the impact of activity on the skeleton. And so there's all sorts of outcomes for us, and it's not a particularly big area in the field, but looking at the record of arthritis, and what we learned from the skeleton about arthritis and its result. Um, so that's not a very, classy, kind of, necessarily interesting area. But I think that's one thing that I think is important for me, and I can see it in my students, is when they're learning about this from the skeleton. I teach my bioarchaeology class and have a laboratory with it and showing the different things that go wrong, not necessarily wrong, but happen with aging and excessive use of carbohydrates in terms of poor oral health, which is a global concern today. That I think these students who've never been exposed to this stuff get a much more broadened picture of what's taking place. So part of that is comes from the teaching and things that they read for the class. And I'm a pretty experienced teacher and lecturer, so I know going into the classroom, what I think is going to be important to talk about and what points I want to get across to them. And just in part because it's interesting in bioarchaeology, what we're learning, but it has real important life, circumstances. We're reading about osteoarthritis and dental decay and so forth, but that's you too, class. What the things you eat, your physical activity, and so you're part of this bioarchaeology. Although you're living, but you're living what you're learning about here in this class and in this field.
Thank you. And if you could study any material from any site in the world, whether it's newly discovered or a long-studied site, what would it be?
Egypt would be great, because of their funerary practices and thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago even. But on the other hand, it's one of those areas of the world where so we can do our field work during the summers and so forth, but it would be hard to beat Çatalhöyük in terms of what has been set up. So many of my colleagues who work in Egypt, not to say that they suffer, but it's pretty close to it. I mean, access to the key resources and so forth. And with Turkey, we just have it down in terms of where resources are coming from, and how to run the project and how to keep things running smoothly. But I would say that we have that same sort of environment, which is possible. That Egypt would be pretty fantastic. But on the other hand, given that there are these challenges there, I think another ideal place, and probably better, and thinking about this more, is archaeology in the UK, in England, Scotland. It is really interesting because there too there are these different people coming in, going out, and for example, Rome is taking a look at the UK and going, we want a piece of that. And so they went to a lot of work to get up there. And, they built Hadrian's Wall and so forth and looked pretty established for a while. But it didn't work out so well, and I'm not sure why it didn't, but they eventually retreated. But that archaeology from that time period is really interesting.
So the final question is always about something outside of your research directly. So you've mentored many students throughout your career. So what advice would you give to students hoping to build a career in bioarchaeology or similar fields?
Yeah, I tell them that, keep focused. This is it's like anything else. If you want to be successful, you can't sort of do it off and on, and I try to tell my students that too. And that you gotta keep that focus. You have to be. I tell them, if you're going to do this, you need to be you. That's all you're going to do. You can't say, well, I wanted to do it sometimes. But if you're going to commit to this and be productive, you gotta. I tell students, Yeah, this is what you need to be successful and contribute and enjoy yourself, is that this is all you want to do with your, once you're out of college or graduate school, and graduate school obviously important. Yeah, I also tell them you need to read widely. And so I'm always disappointed with most of my students, not so much the graduate students, although they're too, that they're not reading. And either because they don't know what to read or they're not doing it. Um, and so you're not going to, if you don't read, you're not going to be aware of the arguments and the record and so forth. And so, I grew up in a family that we were readers from me and my siblings from when we were very young. And so I'm a reader. And this is, so I think that that's important. And so, um, appropriate to our field, reading about our field, reading the literature. And I see in students who they're not, undergrads I can understand, they're not, tuned into what they should be doing, could be doing. And if they're interested in being a professional and want to go into a good graduate school, they need to read. So I tell them that. Not as successful, but graduate students, that's what they got to be doing, and reading a ton of stuff and knowing the field. That's how you see the record. And then another thing is for them to email a bioarchaeologist and ask them that question: what should I be doing? And a bioarchaeologist who's professional and and perhaps high visibility, but not necessarily. And so asking them for their advice, so not just me, maintaining a good academic record. So I did make a list of things that need to be doing. Maintain a good academic record. So if you're in college now or graduate school, and if you're not getting kind of all A's, that's our top grade, then get out of it. If you're kind of floundering, and this is especially true with graduate students, that some, fortunately, it's rare. We're able to in our interview process and selection process, we can usually pick out the good ones, but sometimes we don't, and so there's some who seem to be, it's rare, but kind of clueless on what they should be doing, and so they're going through the graduate program and probably will get through the graduate program, but then at the end of all that, you want to be competitive on the job market. And the job market is tight, as you know, and and I know because I see it. And you gotta stand out. And to stand out, you need to have a couple of publications, good ones. So this sounds like a really high kind of level of what to do. But by the time I came out of graduate school, I had monographs. Maybe not monographs, maybe one. My dissertation was published as a monograph by the American Museum of Natural History, a prestigious, institution with a prestigious monograph series. That was important and an element of me getting a job. That I'm showing that I'm serious in this department. And so then another element of mentorship that I tell them is you need to know your professors and be able to interact with them and closely. And so at Michigan, where I went to grad school, my advisor was Milford Wolfoff, and I spent a lot of time with him. And the other faculty who are biological anthropologists, all of them, some of them I didn't realize at the time I started graduate school, but who were highly influential in the field. A couple of them were members of the National Academy of Sciences and so forth. Of course, I didn't know what that meant, but certainly now I do. And so they need to, spend time with those faculty. So that sounds like a lot of demands, doesn't it? But it's it's what they need to be doing. And so I see, my own advisees or graduate students, some of them, they're not doing that. And so what you want out of all this, a graduate student, is to be able to then, when you're to write a great dissertation, to be on the job market, and to have your faculty writing strong letters. And especially valuable if they are high profile in the field. So that was really, really important for me. I didn't quite realize it. I just knew that I had to, work hard and do what I do, and plus I really, really liked the field, what I was doing, and still to today, it's interesting. So if they have the same thoughts, then they're probably going to do okay. But if they don't, then get out. Let's do something else. Join a club or something. But where I've always worked in departments where we have pretty good success, and I've been able to pick out good students. I've had 30 PhDs in my career, and who are all of them doing well. Maybe because I scared them when they were students. I don't know. I don't think so. I think we were just knew how to pick them out. And everybody has periods of time, graduate students included, when things don't seem to be going too well. But part of it is just sticking it out and keeping at it.
Thank you so much, Professor Larsen, for doing this interview. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely.